is on my laptop, which I'm on looking at.
Hey, Rob. Morning.
Hey guys, hey Gary.
Good to see you.
Well, there's Sue Ellen.
Hi, Sue Ellen.
Beautiful day.
Just don't say it's too hot. It is warm though.
Yeah.
Well, it's fine in the shade.
Yes, indeed. It's lovely in the shade with a little breeze.
We've all turned into weather forecasters.
Yeah. So we're almost there. There we are, 4 o'clock. Well, welcome everybody and thank you for coming. This is the committee of the whole meeting of Monday, July 27th. And I'm going to open up the meeting and the approval of the agenda. I don't think there's much on there. I'll do that by consensus. Introduction of late items. Hope?
No late items.
No?
Can't have them on a committee of the whole unless it's relevant to the agenda topic.
Uh-huh. Okay. Then we'll move right on to staff reports. 2.1, presentation of the evacuation plan by Jennifer McGowan, Emergency Program Coordinator, and Jennifer Ray Pierce, Planner 1. I'll pass it right over to you, Jennifer, for the presentation.
Thanks. Shall I
Okay.
jump into it? Just go ahead then.
Sure, just go ahead.
Okay.
Thank you.
Just gonna quickly share my screen. Can you see it?
Yep.
Yes. There we go. Okay. So thank you for the opportunity to present this to council. Before we jump into the contents, I'm just going to really take you through a very quick history of the project and some of the methodology that was employed in developing the plan. So changes recommended this evening, I believe, will be incorporated within the next month. And my understanding is that this will be on the council agenda in September for a formal adoption. So once complete and formally adopted, the plan will be shared with the stakeholders who were involved in the and participated in the creation of the plan, as well as with Emergency Management BC and the Union of BC Municipalities that supported the plan through funding. And I just want to stress again that even when it's finally adopted by council, evacuation planning is not done for Bowen Island. A lot more, there's a lot more that I want to do with this. And while the hope is that the community doesn't ever need to use the plan, it's also important that it doesn't get put on a shelf for the next 10 years collecting dust. So we have to continue to train and exercise the plan, and that training and exercising may trigger updates in future as we refine the planning. And of course, we'll seek funding to enable the further development of some of the tools that the plan employs. And I can talk a little bit more about that at the end of our presentation. So just briefly, and I spoke to this in the staff report, but in addition to the obvious benefits of pre-planning for emergencies, evacuation planning specifically was recognized as a priority for Bowen Island as far back as 2007, when the Community Wildfire Protection Plan noted that further development of evacuation planning was required given the threat of interface fire here. And our 2018 HRVA, the Hazard, Risk, and Vulnerability Assessment, also stresses the need for evacuation planning, noting that the multiple terminating roads and potential for evacuation by water pose challenges. So council, as you know, authorized staff to apply for evacuation route planning and the Emergency Operations Center grants in late 2018 and 2019. And we received funding approval notification in early 2019. So we subsequently engaged consultants to assist in the development of the plan, and multiple meetings took place throughout 2019 with a variety of stakeholders, including some of the ones you see listed here, but Cormorant Marine locally, BC Ferries, Emergency Management BC, Royal Canadian Marine Search and Rescue, and others. During this time, I was also involved in something called the Siren Research Project, which seeks to better understand how a catastrophic earthquake in BC could affect marine transportation systems and coastal communities that rely on them, and to identify effective resilience strategies. And so after learning about the evacuation planning taking place on Bowen, the project organizers asked that we present Bowen Island as a case study or an example to the project participants. And I did that. An overview of Bowen was presented. I gave them a description of the evacuation plan project and its objectives and some of the challenges that Bowen might face during an evacuation. And as a result of that presentation, we were invited to collaborate with University of Washington researchers who wished to use Bowen as a case study to test a marine evacuation model that had been developed by a gentleman named Fita Cruton, who's a pre-doctoral research associate. So over the last year, I've worked with Fita to provide data on the scenarios that could trigger an evacuation on Bowen and information on our locally available fleet of vessels that might assist. And the result of that work and that modeling have informed this plan. And I'll provide a little bit of additional information on the marine modeling a bit later in the presentation. So the first draft of the plan was produced in fall 2019. Staff training took place in November to familiarize staff with the plan. We held a tabletop evacuation exercise based on a wildland urban interface fire scenario in February of 2020. And that again involved a lot of these stakeholders. So Cormorant Marine, BC Ferries, North Shore Emergency Management, Metro Vancouver, First Bus Company, and others all participated in that. And lessons and learnings from that exercise have been incorporated into this version of the plan. COVID-19 led to a delay in the finalization of the plan, but in mid-April, project completion was passed off to Jennifer Pierce, who was kind enough to step up and ensure that it was finalized ahead of the summer. So I'll pass you over to Jennifer, who will take you through the contents of the plan.
Super, thank you.
Thanks, Jen. I will share my screen here. Okay. So I'll be talking about the contents of the document itself, and then Jen McGowan will be available for questions about the background and things surrounding the plan, whereas I'm more knowledgeable about the document and what's in it. That said, the aim of the document is to provide a practical guide for conducting an evacuation, focusing on safety and well-being of the Bowen Island residents. And so the audience then is not only the municipality, but also takes in mind response agencies and partners and members of the public, including volunteers who might be reading it. So the language in it is intended to reach all of those audiences. The contents of the document have these three kind of larger sections and an appendix. So it starts with an introduction with setup and context, and then has the steps for various evacuation types. So tactical, strategic evacuation, and also how to declare and also end a state of local emergency and what that means. And then it goes into guides for each of the sections according to the standard EOC sections, which include communications, operations, who work in tandem with the incident command center on site, planning and logistics. And then at the end, there are some standardized forms in the appendix. So I'm just going to go through each one of these sections and explain what's basically in each one. So in the introduction, we define what an EOC is, the Emergency Operations Center, and define the difference between a tactical versus a strategic evacuation, and also go over the standardized response goals that are set by the province. Then in the setup and context, there's an explanation of the EOC sections and how they relate to each other and what each one would do right at the beginning. So starting with just an EOC being declared, how to set it up, just those basic, what do we do now kind of questions. There is a decision diagram that one can start at the beginning and follow through just to understand what are the various steps that might lead to a tactical evacuation versus a strategic evacuation, and where you would need sign off from the mayor. So there's just different items in there that would help kind of clarify what happens in that situation. There's a comparison of the EOC levels to help make that decision about which level is the most appropriate. Then in the next 4 sections is information for elected officials, including council and leaders of the EOC, everything from roles and responsibilities of various agencies, what are the legal acts that have given us authority to act in an emergency, and those types of things, general principles of emergency leadership. Then at the end of the setup section is some information on the finances as to how emergency activities are financed and what the EOC finance section is responsible for.
Lost sound.
Sorry?
I lost your sound for a moment.
Oh,
I don't know if did anybody else lose it?
No,
Oh,
I
okay,
didn't.
thank you. Must be at my end. I'll keep an eye out.
okay. I'll try to watch. I don't have the chat open, so I can't see. All I can see is the videos of a few people. So let me know if there's any issues.
Okay.
The next section gets into kind of the meat of what different evacuations are. So the tactical evacuation guide provides the basic tasks for both the EOC and the incident command center in the event of a tactical evacuation, which is then followed by a similar section on strategic evacuation, but it's much more in depth, since this one, the EOC plays a larger role in a strategic evacuation than a tactical evacuation. So here it has the various stages and also some basic pros and cons to help in deciding whether now is a time to evacuate or if we should wait. It also indicates the evacuation zones. So I believe there are 9, and they each have their own color, and they're basically, the size is set based on the number of households in that region. So even though some are larger in area, the number of households is more comparable from one region to the next, such that an evacuation, a zonal evacuation, we would know how many households to be expecting coming out of each zone, since they're roughly similar in size. Then it considers what is a basic island-wide evacuation. So this would be controlled and done by zones, leading to a total evacuation. And the residents would generally carpool to Snug Cove and then take the ferry to Horseshoe Bay. So of course, there would be differences in how it actually happens depending on the conditions, but that's kind of the basic default approach, and then it's adjusted as needed. So it also includes considerations for how we might evacuate without vehicles, what to do with incoming visitors and workers, what we're doing with reception centers off island, how to deal with various vulnerable populations, and options for shelter in place and what that would look like. Then it goes into the details for each one of these stages. So the evacuation alert, order, and resend after the evacuation event is finished, and the state of a local emergency, what that means, the emergency powers are stated there, and then whether to extend or cancel a state of local emergency. So those are all kind of the legislative steps of doing those various things. After this, we get into the sections that are designed for each one of the EOC sections. So starting with the communications section in EOC, this one has the basics, but also references the EOC communications toolkit, which gets more in depth. The next section has some information on the incident command setup, and then gets into the EOC operations section in terms of how to set it up, what are the responsibilities, how they would communicate with the ESS and various liaisons, the operations teams, how those are broken down in their various responsibilities, which include things like traffic management and door-to-door notifications. Then how to deal with those who either refuse or cannot evacuate, with instructions about minors, pets, livestock, people without a means to evacuate and how they can be safely evacuated, and then able adults who do not wish to evacuate and how to handle that situation. Okay, then it gets into how it's coordinated with BC Ferries, and what actually happens when we go to load at Snug Cove. Considering the sizes of the zones, we have an estimation of about how many cars or how many households to expect in Snug Cove. So based on that, we can make a basic default plan for the area that would be adjusted depending on the situation, but that is intended to be able to accommodate one evacuation zone at a time at a minimum. Okay, then we have various assembly areas in each of the zones that are selected. So these assembly areas aren't necessarily the ones that that zone would use in the event of a zonal evacuation, but are rather assembly areas that are identified in advance that we can use and are distributed throughout the island. So given different scenarios, we would know where those are in advance. And then there are also maps for each neighborhood that can be used in the event of an evacuation as a shortcut for an evacuation notice, or to identify alternate means of evacuation if people are not able to go to Snug Cove, or if it doesn't work for some reason there. Each one has an alternate destination point as well for a separate marine evacuation. The planning section has different information that the planning EOC section would use, including evacuation timeline estimates for the ferry, and estimates for the population given different times of the year and the different evacuation zones that would then be adjusted as needed. There's a map of the critical facilities and infrastructure, and then some discussion about alternate evacuation scenarios. This is where we brought in FITA's data pretty extensively to understand what could be done in the event that we could not rely completely on the ferry and needed to look at alternate marine evacuation. It also has a little bit on air and chartered watercraft as well, just so that there's a bit of information on that. Then there's also a bit of resources for recovery planning after the evacuation event. The logistics section has the responsibilities of that section, including different considerations for staffing and resources, the reception centers, and different considerations within that. So including sanitation, how they register people, group lodging provisions, and supports for vulnerable groups of people. And then it also has a map of where pre-identified reception centers on the island have been designated. And finally, we have standard forms that are provided by EMBC that have been personalized for Bowen with our own language and logo and setup that are ready to go for use in an evacuation scenario. So that concludes the kind of summary of the document. And I think I can pass to Jen McGowan unless I'm taking questions at this time.
All right, any questions, anybody? Hold on, I gotta go up to my screen here and see if anybody's got their hands up. It's not working.
Jennifer, can I ask you to stop your share?
Yes.
Thanks.
All right, so I don't see any questions. Thank you very much, Jennifer. And back to you, Jen. Have you got anything else?
Yep.
Okay.
So I just really wanted to quickly touch on the marine evacuation modeling piece. We modeled a couple different scenarios. So there was a wildfire on Mount Collins on a hot summer weekend that cut off the road at about the Legion. And so residents were evacuated to the north via Hood Point, but also out of Snug Cove and Deep Bay. In the second scenario, there was a wildfire at Grafton Road. As you can see, that was by far the most number of people impacted that we modeled. We did that on a summer weekend, so pretty high population estimates, and the entire west side of the island was cut off and had to be evacuated with no ferry assistance. We did a wildfire at Killarney Lake on a summer weekday, making Mount Gardner Road impassable, and evacuated that population by Mount Gardner Dock. And then we also looked at an Eagle Cliff fire scenario on a summer weekday where 700 people were evacuated via Hood Point. And you can see some of the variation in time, or the time estimates that we anticipated based on that modeling. So to give you a bit of a better idea of what inputs went into that, We considered the available fleet of vessels. So that's search and rescue, BC ferries, and then the water taxi operators in the immediate Howe Sound area, and built an optimal evacuation plan based on vessel capacity, performance characteristics, time to availability. So how far away from us are they? Or generally, and then compatibility with docking points. So what size dock can they dock at? What are their limitations? And then we also assumed a certain amount of marine evacuation individually via private boat for each scenario, but we didn't consider on-land transportation to the marine evacuation sites in those times. So the scenarios were used to estimate the optimal completion time based on an evacuation of a given area and population size. And in addition to giving us a sense of the amount of time it might take, based on the available fleet, the model also indicated or helped to indicate that staging might be necessary in specific instances where there's a large population affected, no ferry, west side of the island, and that the secondary fleet is actually not very useful in smaller evacuation scenarios where the entire island isn't impacted. So by secondary fleet, we were referring to, for instance, search and rescue vessels in Vancouver or Richmond who certainly could attend but are further away. So interesting findings came out of that. Not all of them were things that we were expecting, so that's great. That's why we do this kind of work. And we've tried to capture a summary of that information and include it in the plan. And then there's also additional details on that modeling available for EOC staff that can be found in the EOC documents. And then in terms of next steps, what are we going to do after this plan is adopted? As I said earlier, every emergency plan should undergo constant review and revision. So development of this plan will take place on an ongoing basis. And these potential next steps aren't listed in the plan, but for council's information, areas of further development could include further public and neighborhood emergency response program volunteer engagement and training, more detailed local mapping, so including information on trails, beaches, additional access details, etc. The land-based traffic modeling and validation of some of our parking plans and our assumptions. Further development of other planning with other local jurisdictions, particularly in the area of emergency support services. If we're sending our residents off island to receive services when they're evacuated, that needs to be further developed. Identification and assessment of additional private infrastructure would probably be beneficial. So docks and their capacity, more training for staff and volunteers, including drills and exercising, which there seems to be a desire for from the public or from the NERPs in particular. Further development and integration with the NERP kiosk project. So looking closely at how those projects intersect. Revision of the emergency guide for residents that we created to include the updated evacuation information, and then potentially the incorporation of evacuation considerations into municipal planning and land use decisions more broadly. And we'll continue to seek additional funding sources to address these and other future related activities. That is the end.
All right. Is that it, Jen?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I must say this, I went through the whole document and it's an amazing document. It's extraordinarily well detailed. I couldn't find any mistakes anywhere. Not that there aren't any. I mean, we have a ramp here, but then I started thinking about it and it's only good at sort of a high tide, so it might not be useful to you, that sort of thing. But it's an ongoing thing. How often will a review process be completed? Every year?
I think that's probably overly ambitious with a 15-hour-a-week staff position for the emergency program coordinator. I don't think it can be done on an annual basis, but obviously an actual evacuation of Bowen should trigger an update of the plan based on findings during that event. And then any exercises of the plan should also probably trigger an update so that, after action recommendations can be incorporated. And then I didn't put it into the plan. We didn't write or prescribe an update schedule, but at least every 5 years it should be reviewed.
All right. I guess the other question is, how do we communicate two sort of communication points? One, communicate this document to the public. And are you going to have an executive sort of addition that tells, there's a section in there about, you know, the responsibility of the residents and the community during an epidemic. What happens if they're not connected, like with Bowens and or any other material? How are they going to get the information? Just by word of mouth, I guess.
Regarding the existence of the evacuation plan?
Yeah. Well, if there's an emergency, I mean, that too.
Oh, I see. Yeah, we'll use every method possible in an actual evacuation event to alert people. So Bowen's would obviously be one of the easy first choices that we have at our fingertips. But in addition to the impacted or affected houses, having people go door to door and actually advise them in person, there would be every possible form of communication through every media and medium that we have available.
All right. And what about, we do have a little section in the phone book now. Is this going to go in there? Like I'm thinking more about, or is it going to be a handout about what to do in an emergency? You know, that there was one section in there, obviously, that said, you know, grab your personal belongings, especially if it's not a tactical evacuation. You know, grab what you can, and it tells you what to do and where to go and that sort of thing. So, is there going to be obviously a shortened version for that, so somebody can actually sort of
see Councillor Fast holding up the guide for residents. So as I think I mentioned, I'd like to update that guide so that this information is reflected in that, but you're absolutely right that in the meantime, we could easily do some sort of, you know, mail out or communication to the community in that way about the bits that impact them. Yeah,
and make sure that at least that there's a thing in the undercurrent or whatever, and all the different media presentations that just tells them to go see go online if they can and see the presentation. That'd be good. And maybe put just like those what the responsibilities of the citizens are. You know, it's not that long either. There's a couple of versions there, and I think that would be very useful. Okay, anybody else? I see David Hawking. Go ahead, David.
Thanks, Gary. Now, to follow up on Gary's point, but I might have missed this. I lost connection for almost the entire presentation. But to follow up on Gary's point, I'm just sort of thinking, okay, I did see the part about the west side, and I watched your presentation, you know, the public one about a month or so ago. But the thing that people most obviously sort of think about is fire. And the whole west side of the island would not be able to get to the cove to evacuate with a fire. So it would seem like sort of simple information would be to sectors of the island to say, if the road is blocked, here's what you do. You know, so if all my neighbors ask me, hey, if there's a fire and it blocks the main road, we can't go, like, where do we go? I don't know. Is that sort of a simple piece of information that could be, you know, localized in a sense, like the west side goes where?
So
Jennifer just itching to say that.
I want to answer that one. So we do have the neighborhood maps as part of the plan that give an idea for each one of the, well, I should say zonal maps that give an idea for each zone where they would go to evacuate to Snug Cove. And then in the event that they are not directed to evacuate in that direction, what is the primary alternate marine route? So that way they can be knowledgeable that there are at least those two options that have been pre-identified. But we have to be careful not to provide too much information, because in the event of an emergency, what we want people to do is to listen and trust what we're directing them to do, so that we can have a controlled evacuation and know generally where people are going and how many people to expect at different locations at different times. So if we tell them, if the road is blocked, go over here, and they believe that it might be blocked when, to our knowledge, it is not blocked. We don't want them to be splitting off and going in different directions. So, so we do have to be careful about what type of information that we provide in advance. So that's why the maps provide the amount of information that they do, and why they don't go any further than that. Okay. Do you want to add anything to that, Jen?
No, that was good information, and you're right. It's people need to be able to follow the information that's provided, because any event, whatever happens, it's going to be different from sort of the scenario you might first imagine. It's every event.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, thanks a lot.
Point. Okay, thanks, David. Sue Ellen?
Yeah, thank you. I'm delighted to see this because I think I was acting mayor my very first term back in 2015 when the Orange Dawn happened. I don't know if you remember that first big wood smoke event. And people on Bowen turned to Facebook, and people were spooking each other on Facebook, and people were talking about, okay, I'm going to load everything in my car and I'm going to drive to the Cove. If I go now, I could be first in line. And that's what I see that this report can help us avoid, is the uncontrolled kind of everybody, the idea of being coordinated and working together with a plan. So anyway, I'm just delighted to see it as somebody who was kind of chewing my fingernails and looking for a plan back when I was the acting mayor and at the time. Anyway, I like the clear color coding and everything in the document. Thank you, Jennifer, for the, all of the, what are those things called where you follow the lines and you go, the decision tree that you have in there. And I think this will be a real asset. And I think you even answered my question about, I was caught by the map that showed marine evacuation, little boats going off to Keats and to the Paisleys. And I think you said that emergency social services will be further developed. I'm wondering if those communities have been contacted, or is that all through Emergency BC, or?
No, that's an area that absolutely needs to be further developed.
Yeah.
We hadn't initially planned on staging residents on neighboring islands. We obviously ideally would like to deliver them to somewhere they can receive services and become somewhat independent and self-sufficient. But if there are too many people and you need to do things faster, then it's good to know there's another potential option of somewhere you could leave them where their life safety is not at risk while you continue to evacuate the island. But yeah, we'd like them to be comfortable while we've left them on Keats and Paisley. So further advancing those plans is a good idea.
Just drop them off on the beach, eh?
Well, if it saves their life. But I was just curious about, as a Islands Trust trustee, I'm in touch with the trustees from Keats and Gambier, and I've sent them the link to this presentation. They might be watching, I don't know. So,
and we worked closely with North Shore Emergency Management on specific ESS planning, but it's become clear that their capacity is limited and that our residents aren't all likely to go to one jurisdiction. So yeah, we need to do more work with a bunch of our other neighbors.
And I hope that it's clear as well that the Keats and Paisley destinations are temporary. And it's because the amount of time to evacuate groups of people to that shorter distance was much less. So in the event of an evacuation where we had to be as quick as possible, it makes sense to drop them there while the evacuation is ongoing, and so that we're using the vessels as efficiently as possible. And then, as soon as possible from there, they would then go on to places with better infrastructure to handle that kind of thing. So it's not supposed to be like an overnight kind of reception center thing, but more staging, like Jen had said.
yeah, thank you very much. That's great.
All right, thanks, Sue Ellen. And over to Allison.
Okay, I'm unmuted. So I'm just sort of looking at, I think the Cowan Point is the only place where you've got, well, I noticed in Mannion Bay, you haven't got a dock identified, but there are several private docks. So are you intending to use a private dock in Mannion Bay?
That would be the idea. Yeah, to my knowledge, there's no public dock in Mannion Bay.
No, there aren't, but there's about 4 private ones.
Yeah.
And they're all easy to access. So my main concern is for the Cowan Point one. The dock you've identified is
Alder Cove isn't one.
no, it's Echo, and nobody is going to have a clue where that is, and it's very difficult to get to. You either have to drive through the fall off the cliff road through Gary's place and pray you don't meet a car, or drive down a very street, pray you don't meet a car or private driveway. So that is a private dock. And so if people see this plan and start going looking for the Echo Cove dock, you're going to have a lot of unhappy people. Now, and so I guess I was just wondering why Seymour Bay wasn't being used. Because in Bowen Bay, you haven't identified, there are private docks in Bowen Bay, but,
Well, there's no docks in Seymour Bay
well,
either.
there's no docks in Seymour Bay, but I mean,
They can use a landing craft.
yeah, just getting a whole bunch of people, in, you know, Echo Cove I just can't see it working.
Either way, it's not ideal.
Yeah.
To be totally honest, I think we talked a little bit about some of the challenges of evacuating people by beach. It's physically impossible for a lot of the population. There are also a lot of vessels that cannot beach. So we tried to avoid looking at beaches for evacuation. Obviously, in a worst case scenario, that's an option or a possibility with specific vessels and people with without people who are physically able to clamber across logs and potentially up onto a vessel. But we tried to identify docks first. But of course, in future, if there ever is a dock at Seymour Bay, that would obviously be the preference.
Absolutely.
Well, hopefully the developer will get on with it and we'll have one.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
Is that it, Allison?
Yeah, that was my major
Okay.
question. And my other one was just, the fair weather map needs jigging, but Jen and we can talk about that, Jennifer, you and I offline, because you've got one property in the Cowan Point and their access through Lindy's Road, the same as Fairweather's accessed.
Yeah, it's
She's got downhill in Cowan Point, and downhill should be part of Fairweather, just from the access perspective.
yeah.
That's all.
Yeah, there are some imperfections in it. There's no question about that, but it's a really good start, and
Oh, yeah. No,
I think it'll be updated
I'm just
as
saying,
time goes on.
before we publish, it might be simple to just do a little jog change.
Okay, I'm sure we can talk about that. Is that it, Allison?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Maureen?
Yeah, thank you very much, Jennifer. And Jennifer, I sat in on your presentation, your public presentation earlier, so I appreciate the work that's being done here. Thinking in terms of communicating with the public, I wondered if you had considered preparing a short video covering some of the key points in the plan itself. I think increasingly people are relying on receiving their information in that way, and we haven't really done that before with the municipality, other than the videos that the mayor was doing during the shutdown. Would that be something you would consider as an option?
Absolutely. Yeah, I hadn't considered, but certainly could. It's not part of the budget or work plan, but I'm sure there are ways of getting it done regardless. So yeah.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful. I think it would encourage people to engage, and you could direct them to the more expanded information in print form, but just as a way of hooking people in, something short that had a couple of visuals and raised awareness that this actually exists.
Thank you.
And
Frozen.
you're both very photogenic, so it would be a great video.
Yes, it would. Yeah, a picture tells 1,000 words. Huh? Anyway, great piece of work, you guys. Thank you very much. Is there any more questions here? I didn't go back and check. No, I don't see anybody on there. Anybody have anything else? All right. Well, thank you very much, Jen and Jen.
I do.
Ellen has her hand up.
Yeah, go ahead, Sue.
I'd like to make the motion.
Sure, go ahead.
I'd like to move that council approve, that the committee of the whole recommend that council adopt the Bowen Island Municipality Evacuation Plan 2020 as presented in the July 27th, 2020 committee of the whole meeting.
I will gladly second that.
Sorry to interrupt. Is it possible to just adjust the wording? Sorry, I received an email today from Emergency Management BC and UBCM who had asked for one small addition of information regarding re-entry permitting during an active evacuation. And I think I can very easily speak to their concerns in just a paragraph. So is it possible to have the motion just to allow that a little bit of flexibility?
Absolutely, yeah.
As amended by adding the permitted, what?
As amended?
What is the change?
It's to do
Kind of
with
leaves it wide open.
re-entry permits.
So if in a certain evacuations, you might get red tag doors where it means that you're not to re-enter. And so this, I'm assuming, Jennifer, that this is what it's about allowing for re-entry.
Yeah, sometimes people are allowed to re-enter, for example, to one of the commonly used reasons is to feed livestock that haven't been evacuated from the evacuation area. So I'm not sure that we would necessarily have that particular reason, but there are all sorts of reasons people might have to be given or granted permission to re-enter an evacuation area for a set period of time. So this is just a comment on how that might be done and where to look for more information on procedures around that.
Yeah, so if we could say as amended by the addition of
To reflect the
information about
UC.
re-entry permits. Sorry?
Yep. So
I
as
was gonna say-
amended with the addition of a section to address re-entry permits.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to say. That's my
Perfect.
motion.
I'm certainly okay with that.
Yeah.
Is everybody else? I don't see anybody squawking. Okay, so I'll ask a question. All in favor? Aye.
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 I see all the hands.
Okay, that's wonderful. Well, thank you very much. And on that
Thank you.
happy note, we will adjourn the committee of the whole meeting. But just before everybody goes to the fridge, who's interested in taking on the, did we get, were we able to get,
Yes. Emma says that she's on.
she will
staff.
be available?
She's available if needed.
Okay, so would anybody be interested in going to the closed meeting at this point in time? We have an hour and a half.
Yes,
Still
please.
probably have a half an hour for dinner.
Well, I was told earlier it would end early and I would have time to prepare dinner after this meeting and before the next one. So
Sorry,
I got
Allison, I wasn't aware of that change at that time.
No, I
I've got
know. And I
15 minutes.
I brought this up lately.
I got 15 minutes.
Well, I don't know if that's going to do it.
What is it?
Well, you know what it is.
Can we just wait? I'm just gonna
Oh,
end
okay.
the live stream